Okay, I guess we can start. I'm glad to see you here. I'm glad so many people actually survived till the end of almost to the end of the second day. I hope you enjoyed the conference so far. So my name is Andrey, and I'm going to talk today about Jenkins. How many people here actually are not using Jenkins? 3 guys, 4 guys, 5 guys. Okay. Well, there are different alternatives, but I guess Jenkins became so much widely used because it does something very well, or at least it fills the possibilities that other people need. Okay, so a few words about me. I'm a developer. I'm always positioning myself as a developer because, well, I write Java code, I write Groovy code, but also in the last few years I have been involved so much with operations and helping software delivery, defining and automating software delivery process that sometimes I actually working a lot on the ops side. And this talk is in the DevOps track. So we're gonna focus on Jenkins as a tool for implementing some of your DevOps initiatives, some of your automation initiatives. And I'm gonna share my experience with Jenkins and things that I like about Jenkins, things that I usually install with Jenkins, some plugins, some techniques that I usually use, and I hope you'll find this useful as well. Okay, so let's start. Okay, I see no pictures here. That's interesting. It's probably because I don't have internet. No, I do. It's just loading slowly. That's Mr. Jenkins. I guess all of you know the logo. And that's pretty old logo. Let's look a bit into the history of Jenkins. And of course, probably most of you know that it didn't start with Jenkins. It started with Hudson. And the history of Hudson and Jenkins as a CI server goes back to 2004 when Kazuki Kawaguchi started the project at Sun. And at that point, he worked at Sun as well. So the first release we saw in February 2005. So basically, that's 11 years, almost, well, 11 years and 1 month since the first release of Hudson Jenkins product. Quite an old product, quite mature product, quite huge community. In 2008, Hudson has been recognized by Duke's Choice Award and get it in the developer solution category. Then in 2010, a lot of things happened in Java world. Mainly because of Oracle acquired Sun. And since Hudson was one of the products that was kind of developed under Sun umbrella, but then it got into Oracle's shop, Oracle started to think what to do with that. Unfortunately, it ended up with the situation that Kazuki, the original author of the product, left Oracle. And in 2010, majority of Hudson community, which already at that point was quite huge, voted for forking and renaming the product. At the same time, Hudson still stayed at Oracle. They still support it, but I think Jenkins by now is many times bigger than Hudson branch. And around the same time, a company called Cloudbees was created, and they basically decided to make Jenkins as one of its main products being developed. And Kazuki Kawaguchi, the original author, is currently working there. I think it's at the position of CTO or something. Sorry. So the current state of Jenkins is that it's the last version that actually was yesterday, 1.6.51, and the long-term version is long-term support version is 1.64, 642. Sorry. The GitHub organization for Jenkins CI is already 600 members, even more, and they have over 1,400 Git repositories inside the organization. That means like more than 2 repos or almost 3 repos per member. But of course, most of them are plugins, most of them are utilities around that. So it's a huge amount of code that is being committed and maintained inside Jenkins CI community and GitHub organization. So by now, we have more than 1,000 plugins available. So it's a lot of things you can configure, change, use inside Jenkins. And I think you can't really count the number of installations and number of actual users of Jenkins because there's just too many of them. And the good thing also that finally, Jenkins 2.0, there's a huge chance it's coming actually this year. There are already plans, there is already a roadmap, there is a number of features that they're going to implement, and we're going to talk about Jenkins 2.0 closer to the end of the presentation. What's going on with my pictures? Well, as you see, the title is vibrant and lively, but it's not that vibrant on my presentation. At least it doesn't look so. Yeah, now I see it. So if we took out the Git commit history, if you take a look at that, we can see that starting from 2011, number of commits is going pretty crazy, I would say. I don't know many projects that actually have this kind of activity. And as you see, Kazuki, who is the original author, he's still there, and he's contributing a lot of code to Jenkins. So I guess there's no need to reintroduce you to what Jenkins can do, because most of you use Jenkins and most of you know what Jenkins can. But essentially, what the most important features that I think should be focused on is that Jenkins has reporting capabilities and executing capabilities. And that's the main reason why Jenkins can become an ultimate control panel for your automation, for your DevOps, for your deployment, for your releases. And that's what organizations, people, are using mainly Jenkins for. And if they need some kind of UI for controlling the software delivery, most likely there's a huge chance that it's going to be Jenkins. But just again, the focus is reporting and executing. We're going to talk about that a bit more. And Jenkins is so widely used that there are also some products that are either integrating with Jenkins or actually even building on top of Jenkins some features that help implementing different automation initiatives. I just listed some of them. Well, if the previous talk in this room was about Fabric 8. Also, probably you've heard about IBM Bluemix, which is also building on top of Jenkins. Some of its features. Actually, there are many more. Just some of the few I know, but there are many more that consider Jenkins as a either interesting integration point or just using that as a backbone for CI and automation. So, how do you start Jenkins? And that's actually how I the first time started Jenkins. Just get the war file, java -jar, war file. That's it. You have a Jenkins machine running, and developers in your team probably start to be happy because now they have a server or a place where to build stuff, and that's the easiest part. If you are doing that in more organized approach, you probably would like to install a service or a package with all the configuration. And there are ways to do that, for example, on Debian, because Jenkins provides a Debian package and a package repository, where you can just get that and install it in the usual way. The same goes for Red Hat. You can do the same with Red Hat. I think you can actually do the same in Windows, but there's no installer, but you can do something similar. So it's not big deal to install Jenkins and start using that. That's one of the great features because the onboarding is very, very quick. And if the team needs a CI capability, they can get it in a few seconds. And that's a good start. But the problem is that the Jenkins needs to be maintained. What's the first thing that you guys do when you get the first new fresh Jenkins installation? Any ideas? Good. But actually the background is kind of is a well, sorry. That's true. Well, one thing that I do initially is I'm removing the blue balls. By the way, how many of you guys still have blue balls in Jenkins? Okay. You know why Jenkins uses blue balls? Exactly, because of Japanese culture. Because Kazuki Kawaguchi is of Japanese origin, and in Japan, actually at some point in Japan they had traffic lights, which had, instead of green, they had blue color. So because of that, the default color for good build is blue in Jenkins. There was also another explanation for that. So some people say that it's because of the colorblind people, but I don't think it's true. It's a nice explanation, but it's not true. It's because of Kasuki. And the first thing I do usually is I install green balls plugin. And if you didn't do so, you can do. I mean, it's quite easy. And I think it becomes more European in that sense. You get all green stuff. Exactly. Well, of course, the green balls doesn't color all your builds in green. It only colors the blue ones in green. But still, just to make the point, it's looking better. And if we look at how many downloads we had and for green balls plugin, it's quite many, and I think it accounts to more or less most of the new installations of Jenkins. So you can pretty much detect how many new installations are there, people installing green balls and increasing this count. Okay, but seriously, if we talk about configuring Jenkins, the first thing we do, usually, of course, we create jobs, but also we configure a lot of different plugins to help us with our build jobs. And this leads us to a situation when Jenkins actually needs to be maintained. You can't really leave Jenkins out there running and praying that no, it's not going to break or it's going to work for the next couple of years. And if you use more and more automation and more building tools and testing, Jenkins essentially becomes a backbone for your software delivery. That's why it needs to be maintained. Because developers may need more build tools, they may need more plugins to increase the visibility of their builds, they may need faster feedback from their builds, and usually it's not just enough to start Jenkins war and try to be happy with that. It needs maintenance. So if you are really serious about maintaining and supporting Jenkins, then there's a better way to do that. And what I would advise, and what I usually use to maintain and install more complex Jenkins setups, is different provisioning tools. And the thing is, again, because Jenkins is so popular, pretty much every provisioning tool has already a well-defined module for configuring and installing different aspects of Jenkins installation. For example, in Puppet, there's a module, which is official module from Puppet Labs, approved. And you can say, I want to install Jenkins, I want to install plugins, which version of the plugin, how many executors I have on the master, and I can also configure jobs if I want. So the module for provisioning tool gives me sort of abstractions to configure different parts of Jenkins in a reliable and repeatable form. That means that if I lose my server, I can reconfigure it quite fast. The same goes for Ansible. There's a plugin for that. Sorry. There's a plugin for that can help you out with configure plugins, configuring different stuff. The same goes for Chef. You can all configure users, configure plugins, configure Jenkins master. So provisioning tools help us maintaining a complex configuration. And the more components you have in your Jenkins, the more build tools, the more plugins you use, the more benefits you'll get from this kind of setup using provisioning tools. Of course, we can't forget about Docker. Everybody talks about Docker. That's like a thing that you have to mention in any DevOps talk or any talks related to software automation, software delivery automation. So you can actually run Jenkins in Docker. And there is official Docker image on Docker Hub. And you can pretty much start it in the same way you start a WAR file or Linux operating system package. So you just specify that the image name is Jenkins, specify where I want to put my Jenkins home, Java options, port which I want to open, and stuff like that. But the problem is, of course, the configuration is still needs to be done in some way or another. So usually, if you would like to create your own Jenkins image, then you have to customize the original image for something. And there are ways to extend it. So you can, for example, say if you want to add some additional code that executes upon configuration of Jenkins, you can provide some Groovy script for that. Or you can also provide a list of plugins you want to install in the image and run the plugins sh, which is included on the image, and get those plugins installed when you run the container. Sorry. So pretty advanced. And when you have your Jenkins running with all the plugins, of course you want to start adding jobs and start adding more usefulness to that. And you start configuring that, start creating jobs, views, and other stuff. One thing I would like to recommend to install as maybe the second thing is job config history. Because I've seen many times the situation when people randomly go to Jenkins jobs, changing them, and then nobody knows what actually have changed, or nobody is notified that something has changed. With this plugin, you are more or less safe, because it will track every change made to every job, and and especially if you have authentication on top of Jenkins, you will see who did that. So it's kind of small auditing system on top of Jenkins, which works very well. I would really recommend this. Another thing is that when your automation grows, when you have a lot of different jobs or that build same-time components, you realize that soon you need some kind of job templates or common things that you want to that you repeat from one job to another. And using Jenkins UI for that is not always the best idea, because clicking here and there, it takes a lot of time. Especially changing everything here and there takes a lot of time. So the job DSL for the rescue. First of all, there is a job DSL plugin, which you can use to define your build definitions in form of DSL that is actually groovy. So in this case, we create a simple job which connects to SCM, which is in this case Git, and executes Maven as a step. This is okay because it's one text block. You can easily copy it. You can easily submit it to version control. You can do some manipulation of that much easier. Plus, you can apply some real code logic inside to generate some of the stuff. It's much more convenient than editing the XML directly or using Jenkins UI, especially if you need to configure 50 kind of jobs like that. But that's not everything, because there's also a Gradle plugin for Jenkins. It's a Jenkins plugin for Gradle, not the other way around. And this basically gives you an ability to create a Gradle build that can populate your Jenkins instance or Jenkins instances just by running some Gradle commands. So how it looks? So you can just have a simple build.gradle file where you import the plugin, which is called Jenkins. And then you can define which server you want to kind of configure. And then you can use job DSL to define what kind of jobs you want to put on that server. And why is it good? Because you can have a project, executable project, you submit to version control, you version it, and instead of using the Jenkins UI, you have all things defined in text, searchable, mergeable, and shareable, instead of spending time on actually using the UI. And this plugin also gives you an ability to create templates. So if you have builds for same type components, like building Java libraries in the same way, and you don't want to copy the same stuff all over the place, you can create a template for that. Then you can configure this plugin to actually, for example, do something like, I want to create 3 jobs with the same template, and they will have the same configuration, just probably have the different name, which you can control in different ways. Very convenient, especially if your Jenkins, the number of Jenkins jobs they have to support is growing. Approaching Jenkins configuration as Jenkins as code is very beneficial, because that's basically it's code. I mean, it's nothing else. It's just an executable form of something that you want to run on Jenkins. With that plugin, you can also configure views. So pretty much all your configuration can be stored in version control, views, jobs, and you can repeat it and reproduce it on any Jenkins environment. Yes, that plugin supports like update Jenkins items, delete Jenkins items, dump Jenkins items, stuff like that. So you just run Gradle, update Jenkins items, and all definitions that are defined in that Gradle build will be populated onto the server. So this is a way to control the versioning and structure of your Jenkins jobs in a better way, to approach it as code. Of course, at some point you would probably the more steps, the more components you have, you probably would like to join them together and build some kind of pipelines, delivery pipelines. And there are some plugins for that can help. But just as a little disclaimer, in Jenkins 2.0, they plan to introduce a special pipeline language that will be similar to job DSL, which will allow you to define Jenkins files right on the version control, and Jenkins will see that file and execute as needed. But before that, before Jenkins 2.0, there is actually a build flow plugin, which allows to group several jobs into one block of execution, and that defines another groovy DSL where you can write things like that. So in this DSL, we just call 3 jobs in a sequence, one after another. And if one fails, of course, the other 2 will not be executed. Also, what you can do with the build flow is that you can do some magic, like try catch kind of approach to jobs. So if one job fails, you can say that it should execute another job to do some kind of cleanup on that. You can also do some retries. For example, if you have some flaky integration tests, you can do a retry on that. Also, you can build a parallel execution. So some of your jobs can run in parallel, some of your jobs can run in sequence, and you can configure that with a simple DSL, as you see on the slide. You can also have several parallel blocks. And that's basically what the picture that we saw in the beginning. It tries to visualize our DSL into this form, and we can get an understanding where the job failed and where the job succeeded. Also, since you can trigger one Jenkins job from another Jenkins job, there could be a situation where you have a lot of Jenkins jobs which are calling one after another through triggering, and that flow, that pipeline, is not usually visible. Or you have to go through to each job to see where exactly it calls the other one. And there is a plugin for that called Build Pipeline, which visualizes job dependencies into a visual representation, which looks very much like a continuous delivery pipeline. Okay. So now we know how to configure Jenkins. Now we know how to provision Jenkins. The next step that I think is the most important one is the reporting functionality of Jenkins. And there are several plugins that I use frequently to actually make things a bit easier to and more visible to for build engineers and for developers to see. The first thing I usually do, well, one of the first things, is a timestamp plugin. I don't know why it's not included in the base installation of Jenkins. That's quite useful, because initially in the vanilla installation of Jenkins, you don't have timestamps for log lines. But Timestamper is the plugin that adds those timestamps to every log line that you can see in the build, which is very convenient, especially if your builds are going slow at some point and you don't know where and why. Another thing, ANSI color. A lot of tools out there, especially Linux-based tools, they support ANSI color of the output, and it's really much more visual to see where it's red, where it's yellow, where it's green. And again, by default, Jenkins doesn't support that, but there's a plugin for that, so you can install it and get more colorful output, which again could be a way easier way to read the output of some of the programs. Who knows what is TAP? No, TAP is actually quite interesting thing. It's called Test Anything Protocol. And it's nothing really complex. It's really a simple thing. And it has an implementation in every possible language that you may think of. And, well, that's basically TAP. It's the output of some kind of test, and we don't care what kind of test it is, because we can implement this output with Bash scripts, with Java, with Perl, with whatever. So the output is very simple. I think you already know what it is. So we basically say that we have 2 tests, and the first test is okay, the second test is not okay. And what we're basically reporting test results of some kind of test execution. We can have also nested tests, like that. So as you can imagine, we can write programs or scripts that can test anything in this way and output the things in this way. For example, you can write some tests for your deployments. You can write some tests for your provisioning scripts. You can write some tests for anything like smoke tests and stuff like that. And the good thing is that there is a plugin for Jenkins that supports tap. And because tap output is very similar to like JUnit output or any kind of other testing tool output, you can create scripts and testing around anything. And you get this kind of reports. So you can see how many tests were passed, failed, skipped, and you get nice progression over time. So you can test anything, because that's why it's called Test Anything protocol. And yeah, you also get the detailed result report, which looks very similar to JUnit one that you get in Jenkins by default. So you can go in, see what the message was, see what the name of the test, how many nested tests were there. So it's very, very convenient to make a test-driven approach to anything. Another good one is Build Monitor plugin, which I also use quite a lot. Well, basically, it's a dashboard where you can put some of the jobs. So each rectangle here is basically name of the job, and we can see some of them are progressing and some of them have failed. And it's very convenient to have a TV on in developer's room or in the room where you do delivery to see what is the status of production deployment, UAT deployment, what is the status of automated tests, so the compilation and stuff like that, and see it at one screen at a glance. Very convenient. Yeah, it's not just another screen. Another good plugin, which also saved me a couple of times, is Warnings plugin. And the thing is that plugin already is capable of collecting log output, error output from quite many tools. So for example, here we see Java warnings, Maven warnings, Javadoc warnings. And the thing is that plugin already has parsers for tools that you probably don't even know. And it's very convenient for tools, like for new tools, like introducing some static code analysis on top of those tools. It's quite easy because you get very similar approach to static code analysis that you get for Java, for example. And yeah, you can configure as many as you want for your build, but also you can configure custom ones if you don't find the one that is already supported. Sorry. Another thing that makes very good things, certain things about your build more visible, is changing build labels. And the thing is that you can already do that inside core Jenkins. You don't need to install any plugins. You can change the build label to match some kind of environment variables. For example, the current git commit version or environment where this is deployed. So you can customize it quite well. But something that I like better for that, so actually use in addition to that, is called Groovy Post Build plugin. The name of the plugin doesn't really say much about it because, yeah, it's Groovy Post Build. Most likely execute some Groovy scripts after the build, which is logical. But actually, what it does, it can actually help you to add more labels, more pictures, more icons to your build history, to each build that you execute. And in this way, you can communicate additional information about the build, which can be very convenient again. For example, here we say that there is some warning, and we put an icon near the build history, and we also put additional warning in the build result page. And the code to do that, because of course it has to be groovy and just something that you have to add as a possible action in your job, is that you have to check, for example, that this log of the build contains something, and then you can say, I want to add a warning badge, and I want to create some text with the image in the build description page. So it's very convenient, and then we can also say that we want to mark the build unstable. It doesn't stop there, because you can add as many icons, as many labels as you want to expose and make visible more information. You can add this kind of icons. You can add this kind of labels. So if it's a release build, you can say that what kind of version it is if the version number doesn't match the build number. So you can still preserve the build number, but have some specific calculation for version numbers. And again, the way to do that could be very simple. So you have access to all the build variables. You can have access to all the parameters of this job, the result of that job, the log of that job, and you can do some very advanced and interesting logic on top of that. Yeah, so more examples of that. And as I said, you can add as many icons as you want to indicate different situations with the build. And if it's kind of, for example, if it's deployment, you can indicate different states of your deployment, different components of your deployment in this nice way. Another thing that is, I think, becoming more and more important and used is called chat ops. Have you guys heard of this term? Heard? Well, basically, this makes this is about making chat, like Slack, Skype, HipChat, your tool for collecting, aggregating information. And Jenkins has plugins for talking with your chat tool, chat of your choice, and inform everybody about failing builds, failed deployments, and other stuff in the same way as what normal person do when he communicates the same thing over chat. So there are plugins for pretty much every popular chat solutions, and that's how it may look in Slack, for example. So you have Jenkins user saying, or Jenkins bot saying that something has failed, something has something didn't work as expected, and there's a bigger chance that you will actually read your chat, but not maybe ignore your mail or don't read something that coming in different channel. Okay. The next thing is that we need to scale Jenkins. Obviously, initially, most start with just single master, and most start with using maybe not very resource powerful machine to run their Jenkins builds, and we need to scale that at some point. So, of course, when you have a master, you have all the components, like you have the queue that of jobs that need to be executed, and you have a number of executors, the processes that will take one of the builds from the queue and will execute that. Of course, to kind of the number of resources available on one single machine is limited. Now, the way to expand it, you have to add slaves, slave machines, which basically just add a number of executors to your Jenkins farm. And it doesn't mean that you have to have all the slaves to be the same way. You can actually have different slaves for different purposes. Like one, for example, Windows slaves, Linux slaves, maybe some other type of slaves with certain types of software installed in them, and you can label them with some labels, and you can label your jobs with the same labels, and when there's a matching between the slave label and, well, the node label and the job label, Jenkins will take that node and execute it there. So it's very convenient and easy mechanism to scale up your Jenkins environment. One thing that many people do when they see that Jenkins is not coping with the load, especially if they have only one node, they increase the number of executors. And that usually doesn't help because the number of physical resources available on the machine is limited. So you have to, if you really want to increase the capacity, you have to introduce more servers, introduce more slaves. So, and the reason we need to scale Jenkins because we need to get the feedback from our build server as fast as possible, or as qualitative as possible without any additional failures. So the reason for scaling is that, first of all, you may have a monolithic build, which takes too much time to build, which has which consumes too many resources, and it also accumulates frustration. So I've seen many teams that were, complaining about their Jenkins building too slow, or the queue was growing, and the problem is that before you can scale, you have to split your build. So if your build is just a single command or a single job that is executing for a long time, before you can actually scale and make it parallel and make it sort of performing better, you have to split the build into more components. Maybe isolating your tests, isolating your static code analysis, isolating your deployment into separate jobs. If for example, if it was one job before. The reason number 2 for scaling is that you have too many things to build. So maybe you have too many components. Sometimes there are too many projects coming on the same Jenkins instance, and the queue is full, and everybody's waiting for build. So too many branches, too many integration tests, too many validation rules, a lot of things that can happen in Jenkins. And if you don't plan it well enough before, you will end up in a very frustrating situation where you have to wait for server, which is actually a backbone of your software delivery. Another thing is probably you may have too many things to test, and then that doesn't apply to every company, to every project. Sometimes you have to test your product on different operating systems, different target platforms, different markets, maybe different customers, different configurations, and of course, if you have too many things to do that, you have to scale. Lack of resources, yes, you have to scale when you don't have enough. And when you have lack of time, of course, sometimes you can wait for Jenkins to finish. And sometimes it's not critical, but the more time it takes, the more critical it becomes. And Jenkins time and hardware needed for executing Jenkins jobs is usually less expensive than waiting time of your employees or your team members. So that's scaling is important. So usual solution that you have to add more hardware. That's the only way you can handle this kind of situation. You have to add more hardware to Jenkins to give more slaves, more power, because otherwise it's impossible. And I've seen many times when Jenkins is not the most powerful machine and a very old machine, and they're just running there, and everybody's complaining, but still there's no budget to increase the hardware. Of course, you have to invest there because it's gonna save more. Another thing you can go to the cloud. And Jenkins, again, it has plugins for several clouds, for infrastructure as a service solutions, where you can actually scale dynamically. So you don't need to support slave army at any given point in time. You can actually scale at the time when you need that load, and when the number of builds increases. For example, if it's like end of the week where we do release and we do additional functional integration testing, we need more power. But we don't want to pay for that power all over the place. We want to pay only for a period where we actually have the load. So imagine that in original Jenkins setup, you actually have a limited number of executors, which is limited to the total number of executors available on all nodes, on masters and slaves. And it goes like this. So if your number of busy executors is reaching that number, then at this point you're stuck. You have to wait. But with the plugins, you can actually make Jenkins to create additional slaves dynamically. So it will handle this load. It will increase the number of slaves, handle the builds, and when the queue goes down, it will decommission those slaves. Very convenient, very actually resource-effective and cost-effective solution that may help to adjust your needs when you have them. One of the plugins that I use quite often is EC2, the Amazon EC2 plugin for the Jenkins plugin from Amazon EC2, which allows me to do what I just described: starting slaves on demand, starting slaves on when I actually need them. And yeah, there's some before you can use Amazon EC2 for that, you have to prepare a bit. So you have to create a key for access key and security for Amazon API. You have to create a key pair, which Jenkins will use to connect to the slaves. You have to, of course, open the SSH port, which usually Jenkins is using for running commands on the remote slaves. And then you have to select what kind of machines you're going to use for running your slaves. And here, again, there's something that you can handle differently. You can use some of the base images from Amazon, but usually they don't have the tools that probably your project may need. So you can actually, ideally, create your own images with all the software that you need for running your slaves, like, I don't know, install Java, install Ruby, install some other tools that are needed. Then, by having this image, you can create slaves on demand as soon as possible, and they will have all the tools installed. And you can still use the provisioning tools to actually configure those images. And again, you can just use the EC2 plugin for Jenkins to say that, now please create those slaves on demand for me. Specifying all the information we created in previous steps, and you're good to go. So I'm wrapping up. I would like to give some recommendations for in general for Jenkins. Setup, configure, maintenance, and then so some good practices that I used all over these years. One thing that I think is important is that the job structure of any job structure should be as simple as possible. Don't try to use too many plugins to create your jobs, and don't implement too many build steps inside the job. I've seen many times when people create huge job definitions with a lot of steps, like calling this, calling that. Try to split that, or try to actually delegate the job, the work of doing the glue logic into your build tool rather than to the Jenkins. Because in this way, you should always have the possibility to actually execute the same things you execute on Jenkins from your local machine, from any other machine. Jenkins is basically just an executor engine. It doesn't need to be. You should not depend on that too much. It should be just executor engine and reporting engine. That's it. Another thing is that, which I already mentioned, is that for provisioning and controlling complex Jenkins installations, you probably, and especially for scaling them quicker, you have to use provisioning tools. And there are a lot of support in there. You can actually find a lot of modules and blog posts and snippets that you can use to maintain your Jenkins installation. Also, optionally, you can use Docker containers to isolate some of those installations. So, for example, if you have to support several Ruby versions on the same machine, maybe it's better to have those Ruby versions inside the containers and run containers inside your builds. Also, you can use containers for running functional and acceptance tests for your applications if your applications are small enough to get into to be put into a container. And try to use job DSL to control your job templates and to define to approach your Jenkins as code, your Jenkins configuration as code. Of course, security is another important measure thing that sometimes is forgotten. I've seen quite many unprotected Jenkins installations that anybody could change. So first of all, especially if it's a public Jenkins system that is visible on the internet, of course, enable HTTPS, put web server in front of that. Also enable Jenkins security and protect it with, preferably with LDAP, and configure users and groups for that. Another small recommendation that may be useful is that I've seen also sometimes in big organizations I see a situation when they have one Jenkins for many projects. And those projects may be independent, but they still use the same Jenkins, the same queue, the same resources. So having multi-master approach, when you have basically isolated Jenkins installations and isolated management of those instances, of those Jenkins farms, it actually is much more beneficial and easier to use than competing for resources. And especially if your Jenkins configuration is put into job DSL, is put into provisioning tools, then creating new Jenkins masters and new configuration for Jenkins is quite easy. So it should be an operations task to do that, and they should know how to do that. It should be easy. Okay, that's kind of it. Well, almost. Last thing I promised is the Jenkins 2.0. So it's probably going to come this year. The work has already started. There's a roadmap on that. So they're going to introduce a pipeline as code, like a Jenkins file. So it's going to be similar to gem file or Docker file approach when you define pipeline of your builds inside Jenkins file, which can be also, of course, stored in version control. They're going to improve the UI or the UX of the product, and especially one thing that they're going to introduce is when you install a new instance of Jenkins, you will get some recommendations. What are the good plugins for the good set of plugins that you can use immediately when you start Jenkins build, when you start using Jenkins. So that's something that at the moment it comes with experience, but something that it will try to put into as part of the product, which is very great. Also, Jenkins UI is constantly improving. It's probably not the best UI in the world at the moment, but they work on that, and it's getting better and better with every release. Also, another thing that again they're going to do together with Jenkins 2.0 is that they're going to improve the website, clean the documentation, clean the plugin index, and also what they promised at least, what CloudBees and Jenkins team has promised is that it's going to be totally backwards compatible. So there should not be any issues converting from old Jenkins to new Jenkins. No, now that's it. Well, thank you. And if you have any questions, we have, I think, 5 minutes to go ahead.
Thank you for presentation. You know, I heard that some guys use Jenkins not for building applications, but even for, let's say, rolling out some updates for websites.
Well, which is a deployment task, I guess.
Have you got an experience on this? And if yes,
yeah, definitely.
Can you provide some details, maybe?
Jenkins has been used, can be used for any kind of releasing of software, of updating software, uploading software, or uploading static sites to over CP. To me, it doesn't differ that much from building or compiling or assembling your WAR file or something. It's just another tool that you execute from within the tool. And I've seen Jenkins being useful for the whole pipelines, from building to final deployment to production. So, did it answer your question?
I have a question about upgrade policy because I work with Jenkins more than 4 years already, and have experienced many errors. Initially, we had this policy that we don't upgrade, and then we had to upgrade because one of needed plugins supported the newer version, and this was pains and take some week. And latest we have that we need to upgrade instantly all the newest versions, and this also make the problems because some our core plugins used some I think 2 or 3 times already had the problem that newest version had the bugs, and also it broke and we needed to downgrade. So what is your opinion about upgrade policy?
Well, first of all, there are LTS versions of Jenkins, which...
Yeah, it's for Jenkins, but about plugins?
Well, again, I would not try to use every plugin that is there and try to minimize the number of plugins to only the ones that are very active and supported very well. And also having the provisioning tools at your hand, having the configuration of the whole Jenkins installation inside, let's say, Chef, Puppet, or Ansible, may give you a tool to actually test the installation before you actually do the upgrade. Plus, if you use the job DSL to configure your jobs, and any changes in like job versions or plugins that they use can be done with simple search and replace, and then you can just apply the same job DSL to new Jenkins and verify that actually works. So you have a verification thing that you can do, especially if your Jenkins is very critical. I would go that path. I would try to have the code that can provision it and then can simulate the same installation as you have in your production kind of production environment, and try to test it there. That could be the approach.
How do you see possibility to change cron job with Jenkins?
Yeah, so some people do that definitely, and well, it really depends on what kind of job it is. If it is the job that is closely related to software delivery pipelines, software delivery in general, that every developer should be aware of. I don't know, some cleaning of old caches or cleaning of Maven repository. I don't know, something that is important for software delivery process. I would keep it in Jenkins, and this gives visibility to everybody who has access to Jenkins and has also an ability for people to control what's happening. So it's doable. And you
Well, what do you think of wrote some protests run from Jenkins?
in production, you mean?
Yes.
Also, why not? It really depends on how your team is structured. Because if your operations guys don't use Jenkins and it's only the dev thing, then they will probably be against that. But if they're very well familiar with how Jenkins is used and how the process is working, and if they need this to provide this the information that the cron job is like logging, for example, to developers, then using Jenkins for that, totally fine, no problem with that. It really depends on the setup and what kind of team you have. Any other questions? Okay, then thank you.